People think there's a separation. There's no separation. We do not go into nature. We are not communing with nature. We are nature. Connecting with trees is a proven science. We must do our best to preserve what's here now. You can't put a value on this. You can't put a value on ancient forests. You can't put a value on the oceans. They're innately valuable beyond anything that can be bought or sold. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Reflection Connection podcast. I'm your host, Vince Jamieson. Today we have a timely discussion. This is going to be episode 9, and I'm titling it Nature is Priceless. There are a lot of challenges in the world. There are a lot of opposing viewpoints. One of the things that I'm seeing lately is a challenge to what has been preserved over time. And what we have, and I'm speaking of the US particularly because that's where I live, that's where I've grown up. What has been put aside in the sense of our Endangered Species Act to protect certain species or the public lands was done over periods of time, and in my view, and in the view of many others, even though these are what can be considered large swaths of land, it wasn't enough as it was. And although forests can be replanted, and although Gaia, Earth, does restore herself, always, eventually, it's still a loss. It's still a setback. It's still a work that then needs to be undone. And so, as much as we hear that's going on, the wonderful thing is we do live in a time where we know what's going on. It's kind of the 20 seconds after a bill is put into place or a law is made, everyone kind of knows about it thanks to social media. And there are many, many, many people who are doing wonderful work. I don't want to say fighting, but yeah, combating, pushing to make sure that these things stay in place, that they're suing and countersuing and doing all of the messy work. That's definitely appreciated, and it's important. But what I want to get to today is a fundamental shift in perspective. I grew up in a suburban context in New York City. We had a house and a lawn, but we would drive by this road that ran through my town. It was called the Green Belt, and it was basically this forested section for miles and miles, with just a road in between. And my family would call it the weeds. And I have numerous problems with that. First of all, weeds are native plants, and I think the whole context of weeds at best maybe comes from Victorian gardening, and at worst probably comes from or was reinforced in the early 20th century by chemical companies. And this idea of lawn, which was always a kind of a chemical proposition because it's just so unnatural. But there wasn't always an appreciation, and that grew within me as I got older, and as well as with other parts of my family when we had a lucky enough to have a second home in the mountains and experienced more of it. And I think that aspect is an important part. I think as much as it's challenging sometimes to open up sections to trails and visitors, there's also a component that's necessary in a sense, because when people don't experience things, they don't always care about them. And it's a sad fact, but it can also be done in a respectful way. And what I want to get at is this context, which I've even, used many times. This idea that we are protecting nature, fighting for nature, going to nature, enjoying nature, being out in nature. I think that this needs to shift in and of itself, the type of conversation, because innately what we're saying is we are separate from it. And what I'm posing is that we are not separate in any way. Well, we are having a physical experience. And so everything physical on this world has come from the earth, has come from Gaia. And just as the trees spring forth and the other aspects, the mountains and, every aspect uses its material to form a body and spring forth, and it's animated by a life force, yes, but just as we are. And so we are nature. We are this planet. There's no separation. And to a certain degree, I wonder if those that are keen of making trouble and muck are aware of that. What I'll say is, I don't know. And to peg one motivation on a large quantity of people, I think is unrealistic and unfair, as well as to hold a space that is permanent, or they are innately deficient, flawed, bastards, whatever you want to call them. Because it doesn't create space. It doesn't create space. I choose to hold space for them. I choose to hold the possibility of them shifting and changing and becoming more aware. And just as maybe as a child, although I was a child, but just as maybe as a child, I probably called the forest weeds as well in a derogatory way, not understanding. In a sense, similarly, I think that they are children in their development and closed off for different reasons, and seem to, in my experience, be playing out intense aspects of selfishness, of carelessness, of, I would say, aspects of trickery, aspects of vengeance. These are all things I've done. And I think anybody who's listening to this, if you really are being honest, these are all things that you've done at some point in some way, probably much lesser than what we're seeing, but sometimes it takes a very big external gesture for us to examine aspects of ourselves. And this opportunistic aspect that I'm seeing, which is just so selfishly oriented. And it seems like they're just, as they're kind of falling, they're just grabbing, grabbing, grabbing without foresight, without awareness. There was a Native American saying, and it was actually the company was, to my knowledge, named after that, at least, the original owners, seventh generation. And one of the tribes, they had a saying, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, in our every deliberation, we must consider the next 7 generations. I don't think for anyone listening to this, I have to get into the generalized, harmonious relationship with the earth that many indigenous and native cultures had. And this country was built on cheating and pillages, right? I mean, tricking native peoples who have no concept of ownership of land and buying it for beads and trinkets and then wiping it out. So this isn't a new history. And it's an interesting time because we are in a time this year, especially of all things coming to the surface and of disclosure. And what I've seen and what I've spoken about before is there is the original conversations around this topic of disclosure were largely based on our intergalactic family, or what some people might consider extraterrestrials, coming and being known this year. But I quickly saw that always, in all aspects, as above, so below. There's also this disclosure within us, this disclosure within our cultures, within our collective, and we're seeing that everywhere. And even with this conversation, it's uncomfortable to see these things all the time for all of us who are, somewhat aware and empathic. But it's better to see and to know that you can do something about it, or at least choose to respond in some way, than what we had just a decade ago, where 90% of this would have gone unnoticed, at least 90%. Maybe some of it would have surfaced much later. And we're hearing things in real time. We're just hearing a lot because a lot's going on. And so I don't think I need to go further down that path because we're all experiencing it. And unless you're really living under a rock, and as I've said a million times, I live in a bubble and I'm aware of it. What I want to do is I want to create a space where we can be constructive where we are. And so I want to get back to what I mentioned earlier, is that we are nature. There is no separation. And if you want to connect, this is a wonderful perspective to hold. Because when I started connecting with aspects, I would go to the woods, and I did quite a lot of this, especially when I was years and years ago when I was living in Santa Cruz, California, and they have the wonderful redwoods and trails and the mountains and the sea, and it's just beautiful. And I was trying to at first connect with the trees, and what I realized was when I had a separation between us, I couldn't connect. But when I visualized myself with my hands on the trunk as being one with the tree, then I started to connect. And this is true with all of it. And this is more true than not. This is more true of our experience, regardless of how we choose to think of it. We're all this interrelated, interdependent part. Each aspect is intrinsically valuable. So I encourage everyone to go out where you can and connect. Connect with the trees, especially. It's a wonderful thing to do. And you can just simply, if you're only partially inclined, you can just put your hands on the trunk and stand next to it. If you're able to, kick off your shoes if it's appropriate, and be barefoot next to it. It's a wonderful way to just ground, which there's no argument about. That's scientifically proven. You don't always have to be in a forest. I've connected with a number of really special, I don't want to say special trees. I've had special connections because they're all special. I've had special connections. One of them was, and one of the most profound ones, was in the most ridiculous place. was at a rest stop in Georgia. Like, seriously. I was on my way to, I was driving to a location in Tennessee and passed through northern Georgia, where it meets Tennessee, obviously. And there was a rest stop, and I remember it was like a beautiful evening, like the weather was perfect. There was nobody really there. And they had these trees that were, I don't know what they were. This was a while ago. I don't know if they were some kind of eucalyptus or if they were probably some kind of flowering tree, because it's generally what they'll put in those type of places. But I remember something about it. I think the bark had almost like a rainbow or a multicolored aspect to it. They weren't old trees. It was like, I don't know, maybe not even 6 inches in diameter, maybe around that. And I just connected with it, and it was really marvelous. It was such a strong connection, and I can't say for sure if it was, I don't want to take away from the tree, and I don't want to take away from myself. But I don't know if that particular tree was, or that species was wanting to connect, or had a proficiency to, or if I was just kind of in the zone, if you will. But my point is, it doesn't matter where it is. That's not a place that I would normally send people, but it really, really worked. And I've had other aspects, obviously, like in the redwoods and a particular tree, which is well known in Santa Cruz, that a spring comes out from beneath it. And um, actually, that's not my favorite tree there. It's a wonderful tree, but there are others near it that are I've had more personal experiences with. We are intrinsically connected, and to a certain extent, we can't always control what we see. And often it's not always in places where we are, right? It can be on the other side of the world. It can be in cities far away. It can be in our backyard. But we can choose how we respond. And all physicality is energy first. And where we put and choose to hold our attention matters and is in and of itself a powerful and useful tool. We can choose to stay in a lower vibrational place when we hear about a forest being cut down or animals being abused or any of the ugly things in our society, people just being mistreated, laws that are intrinsically helpful being changed. We can choose to shift our attention toward the ones that are working. So there are forests that are being regrown. It's proven in Colombia and also in several places, also in Guyana. They're regrowing rainforest and not just like one tree being planted, those ridiculous, bad ecological greenwashing forest initiatives, but actual full rainforest with all of the plants and interrelated species being there. There are waters that are clearing that haven't seen fish or dolphins or seals for generations. There are all kinds of things that are still wonderful and that are being actively done. And so I'm skipping around a bit, but it's all related. we can connect. We can shape our world. We can shape our universe. We can shape our experience. And one way that we can, I don't like the word fight, but we can move the needle in a more towards a more harmonious direction, where some are working to swing the pendulum and go backward. We can help support harmonious living and experiences for all, both with our attention and where we put it. Yes, it sounds passive, but it's not. It's an active thing. You can look at and I do this all the time. It's hard to not notice sometimes the sky, but I actively take my attention and I find a blue piece and I put it there. And I always acknowledge, I really appreciate the pure blue skies and the natural clouds. Done. Don't focus on the rest, all these people and the this and the planes and the da, 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 da. No, it doesn't help. And you can connect. Many are aware of this. We are in a time where we are shifting to a new era. And so those who have ruled and been in charge and enjoyed all of the dysfunction that has gone on for the last few centuries, or wanting to stick around, and they know that they're not able to, and they're really pushing back right now. And we can just reinforce that. And one way is energetically. Another way, like I said, is for you to connect, for you to experience these things, for you to shape your world. And you can choose, though, and you can be an example. And you might not see it. You're not an example for him to then follow. You're an example because that's who you are. There's a difference in that. You're not here to override somebody else's experience. You're here to create your own. And in a very real way, there are as many worlds as there are people overlapping. If you're not familiar with this concept, I'm not going to go into it much more, but at this time, but there are things that you can see that aren't necessarily in your world. What's been described as, separate concurrent experiences is what has been described as prism, or can be what has been described as almost a glass wall where you can see out and they can see in, but you're separated. And I bring this up because those people who we see as being key troublemakers can often use some light sent their way. Shining a light upon them can allow them to see aspects of themselves. You can hold a space for them instead of damning them, instead of just judging them. Obviously, nobody likes what they're doing, but just judging them and cursing them and hating them and whatever is just adding more pain to the pain. These people aren't functioning in an ideal way. They grab power because they're not in connection with who they actually are. They're empty and they're miserable, and all they have is this, and it's never enough. And now it's being taken away. And so, shining a light upon them, sending good intentions towards them, that they can shift, that they can wake up, that they can be happy, almost like the Grinch whose heart grew, what, 6 sizes that day, right? Anyone can have an about face. I certainly have had many. And for you, for all of us that are listening, that are experiencing this together, we can live in this moment the way that we want to live. Regardless of what's going on, we can choose harmony. We can choose well being. We can choose cooperation. We can choose empathy. We can choose to look at what's working. We can put our attention toward those that are actively making a difference. And there are going to be variables in all of that for all of us because we all have different viewpoints and opinions in our different places in our lives and different perspectives. But there are general consensuses where we definitely, I think, can all agree that what remains of the untouched natural spaces needs to be and remain untouched. And to the best that we can hold those spaces for a while until this blows over would be helpful. And if we hear of certain places that were not able to be held, we hold a vision of them in all of their glory to be reborn again. It's a little heavier than I expected. One of the things that you can do and when you're connecting with trees is they're happy to, when they have it, they're happy to allow you to draw energy from them. So it's a little premature. I'm going to go into this more in a couple of weeks. In the Chinese calendar, there's a holiday. It's called Qingming. And it's basically, it translates roughly to, I believe it's like grave sweeping or tomb sweeping. It's, I believe, a couple of weeks after the vernal equinox, the spring equinox. And it's a time when it's been seen as the greatest chi, the greatest, the highest amount of life force, which is just kind of bursting forth everywhere. And so even in the colder climates, the moderate to colder climates, this is when spring is really kind of starting. It's when things will really start to bud. And even for some of the colder places, there's still the underground movement because it's a planetary in the northern hemisphere I'm speaking about. And of course, it'd be the reverse in the southern, but it's a planetary kind of upliftment, just this high amount of energy. The animals and the birds are in tune with this and have their babies. There's an upwelling and there's a overflow. And so one of the things that you can do, and if you happen to live in a warmer place, which I do, then you can do this a little earlier. You can even do this now, as long as everything is fully budding, and especially if you're working with an older tree, which has kind of a massive trunk to it, then it's much more established. And make sure that it's thriving. Make sure that it's not just leaves on it, but like a ton of buds and like a ton of like baby leaves are coming out, and it's really like you can just feel it, you can see it, you can visually see it. And then you just hold your hands upon it, or you don't even really have to be touching the tree. You could even just visually and just draw the energy from the tree into you, or from below up is a nice way too, from the feet up through the ground. And this can be a really energizing and harmonizing thing to do, and something that you can do. I usually will do this roughly from the spring to fall, spring equinox to fall equinox. Fall equinox, I usually stop because, again, that's the opposite. So everything is kind of slowing down. And even though the trees still have their energy, I want to be respectful, which brings up another point, something which is kind of opposite of what we're seeing on our news. And stop watching the news. Just stop. These are not these are not just like innate things. This is not wood, like living wood. These are sentient creatures, different from us, but still sentient. And you need to, it's best to approach them as such, respectfully. And just like you don't ask for or take from someone who has nothing, you don't do that with this being out there, which is completely dependent on the external. Even with the ocean, too. When you're in a forest and you're looking at a pine cone or a flower or at the beach and there's shells, you should always stop when you pick something up, even if you feel like you really want it. Stop and ask. Ask it. Do you want to come with me? And then wait. Because usually a good thing would be to a really simple thing, which comes from almost like kinesiology, but you can, if you're not sensitive to your body, you could even like visualize almost like a right and a left kind of thing, like, and just assign one yes and no. And then I visualize either like almost like a needle going back and forth that would point to one or to the other, or one would rise, another one would sink, or there are lots of things you can run it through your own internal processes. But it's really good to establish a way of working with your intuition as well as with other things where you can create a yes or no situation that you can understand and then continually use that, and it'll function more accurately and more stably over time because you're reinforcing it. And whenever you're unsure, then the answer is no. So just don't take something. Same thing. You want leaves, you want a stick or something, you want a flower, you ask for it. If there's one flower on a bush, you don't take it. It doesn't matter if it says yes. If you think it says yes, no, you just don't take it. If there's 140 flowers, take some. Ask and take a few, couple. If there's 4 of them on there, and for whatever reason you really need this one, or there's some reason for it, try to take the one that's a little lower. Maybe take the one that's a little less perfect, the one that's a little kind of, frumpy on one side. Be respectful when you go out there, and it will come back to you. So I'll go into this a little later because it's a little premature in the calendar from this time of recording, but I'm in a warmer place and I haven't even really done that yet. I'm just starting to see budding, but we've had cold snaps throughout the country, and so there's not like a fixed thing. You have to be aware, and check in with them as well. But this is a beneficial thing. This is part of communing. This is part of, I think a lot of people would benefit, as I said before, with a simple analogy of people who are able to walk through trails will then appreciate, an area and look to protect it more. Well, I think even more so, people who are interacting with these other types of life forms and have interactions with them that are conscious and beneficial mutually, I think will respect and appreciate them more. When you are walking through a field, or especially now in many parts of the world, after a good rain, you'll see wildflowers coming up. Go over them, go over to them, touch them. I see you. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate you. You think it's nothing. It's not just this like piece of lettuce down there. And even the lettuce. If you're growing lettuce, if you're growing food, connect with it. Thank it. Appreciate it. There's something to be said for animism. I was recently speaking with a friend about a trip that I'm contemplating to Japan. And one of the things I always appreciated was their animist and Shinto background, generally speaking, where they see everything as alive and they experience everything as alive. The trees, the plants, the waters, the mountains, the sky. So what was portrayed as foolishness by a cut-off materialist, unintelligent, quasi-scientific 19th and 20th century is now being undone. As we've advanced in our sciences, we see that everything is interconnected and everything is energy and everything is alive, and there's nothing that's not. And so, yeah, this was a little bit of a ramble, but I encourage everyone, if you can do nothing else, to just get out when it's a little warmer wherever you are and it's a nice day. Get out, connect with a tree or two or three. Allow yourself to just, if it's appropriate, sit near it on its trunk with your back against it. Or just, like I said, even if you're at a rest stop, stop and see if there's one that just you want to go over to for whatever reason and go over to it. And just close your eyes and focus your mind and connect with it, become one with it. Do this with the mountains, do this with the rocks, do this with the waters. You'll have wonderful experiences that will unfold in ways that you can't imagine, or maybe you have and you do. Well, great, keep doing it. And also, too, it's, I think, a really important time to energetically, if nothing more, respond to what we're seeing, to what you're seeing. And if it's something which is other than what you wish, then choose in your mind, pause and see it as you wish it. Maybe say it out loud. Not, I wish for them to effing stop. No. I wish for them to care. I choose for them to care. I choose for this forest to be well. I choose for the lands to be restored. I choose for this to hold its continued protection. And yeah, see what aspects it's mirroring within you. As I said, have you been selfish? Have you been greedy ever? If you say no, you're a liar. Have you been opportunistic? Have you been, to a much lesser degree, just careless? There's so much where my mom lives is in Florida, was like horse country, and it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, it seemed, and is being continually built up. And although where she is, they have like deed restrictions, so they have minimum acreage that people can build upon, which is unusual. Still, though, when you actually look at what they're cutting down, like virgin forest, basically replacing it with a house with lawn and some trees at least, right? So there's to drive through casually, it looks like all this space and all this trees, but when you actually look at what gets cut down, it's a lot. It's a lot. There are different places around the country and around the world where it's less expensive to build than to buy because of markets that have been manipulated. There's no reason for homes in middle America to have doubled and tripled in the last 5 years. There's no reason for it. So there's a lot that needs to just be looked at. And there's nothing wrong with money, and there's nothing wrong with wanting success. These are things that are useful. But when you're careless about its consequences, it's something to look at. So connect with nature, respond to everything that you see by holding the space for it to be the way that you would like it to be. And yeah, you can make a difference. This is, after all, your world. You are the one who is creating the world that you are living in a very real way. And just because you see something going on in the world doesn't mean it's actually in your world. Might sound a little woo-woo to some, but be respectful. I think it's time that we all start living the way that we want to see in the world. And maybe we need to punch it up a little for ourselves, right? Because that's what you can control. So I hope this was helpful. If you've enjoyed this, go ahead and review, send me a note. I'm Vince Jamieson, and I'm always here reminding you of all that you already are and all that you are already connected to. Until next time.